But in episode 2, you learn it's not Steve. It's Steve's semi-twin brother, Ben. And he's basically the exact opposite of Steve. He's a non-douchebag chiropractor who's a divorcee with a teenager. And overall seems like a really nice guy, but his arrival has freaked Jen out to the point where she actually faints. Don't worry, Jen, I was fooled too. And he's shown up at Jen's place because Steve is missing, and every night he calls his mom, but he hasn't called in a while. And on top of it, the FBI came around looking for Steve. So he wants to know if Judy has seen him, but she says no. Ben then gets a text that Steve's office is being raided by the FBI and heads out. And when Jen gets Judy alone, she lashes out at her for not telling her that Steve had a twin brother. But she's also very concerned about the FBI, and Judy admits that it's probably her doing because she turned Steve in for money laundering. And Jen is really pissed off at that, but what was she supposed to do because they were fighting at the time? And the reason Jen is so freaked out is because the FBI is really good at connecting dots, and they are the dots. Jen gets really nasty and says, you know what, Steve was right. Everywhere you go, chaos follows. She asks, what's going to happen to me if I get caught? To my boys, they'll be orphans. But since Judy is working with the FBI, she vows that that won't happen, and she can talk to the FBI and fix this whole thing and steer them in another direction. But Jen says, I'm not going to let you take care of my boys. You were living in your car yesterday. You have some of the worst judgment of anybody I've ever seen. Jen tells her, do not steer the FBI in any direction, just stay out of it. But Judy can't stay out of it. She heads to Steve's office along with Ben and starts planning a story that Steve went off to Mexico because he said previously that if he was ever in trouble, that's where he would go. And it's a pretty believable story. And when Ben and Judy get to Steve's office, it's been completely raided by the FBI. Torn apart. And Ben can't figure out what kind of mess Steve was in. And Judy says, I know it has something to do with the art gallery because it was a front. Ben starts shaking his head and says, you know what? I'm glad you guys broke up because Steve doesn't deserve you. And that's when Judy admits that she's the one who turned him into the FBI for money laundering. She starts apologizing, but Ben says, don't apologize. You did the right thing. He brought this all on himself. Then while looking through his office, Judy finds the rock that Steve took from the petrified forest. And Ben says, I thought you weren't supposed to take rocks from there. And she says, yeah, there's multiple signs about that. But Steve's gonna Steve, and Judy decides to keep the rock. And while they were going through Steve's office, Jen headed to work and started looking at who was going to take care of her kids if she was caught. And there's really only one option for her. It's Lorna. So she asks Lorna if she will take care of the boys, and of course she says yes. But immediately Lorna thinks she's sick, and she says, I'm not sick. She says, well, how are you sleeping? Jen says, I mean, it could be better. So Lorna pulls out some pills and says, here, take 2. But the pills are fentanyl, and Lorna can't even remember where she got them. Jen grabs the pills and then heads over to the Holy Harmonies concert where she's approached by a mother repping the Harmommies. And she's asking Jen to sign up for an event to help out, and Jen keeps saying, oh, I'm busy this day, I'm busy that day. And when she keeps pressing for it, Jen really snaps at her. She then asks Christopher if his brother is still a lawyer because she needs to redo her will, but he's actually a criminal defense attorney, and she says, yeah, I'll take the number anyway. When her, Henry, and Charlie get home that day, Detective Perez is there at their doorstep, and Jen sends the kids in, and Detective Perez is there because she's giving her the restraining order against Judy Hale, but as she's doing so, Judy comes out of the house, and Detective Perez is like, you've got to be kidding me. Jen plays it off like she needed a restraining order because it was a misunderstanding, but Detective Perez is not buying it. She says, it's a misunderstanding like she didn't hit your husband? You were in my office 2 days ago saying that I should arrest her, and if I had the evidence, I would have. But the girls tell Detective Perez that it wasn't Judy at all. It was actually Steve, because Steve was driving and it was his car. And Judy was just taking the fall. Judy then goes inside, and Detective Perez warns Jen that Steve was mixed up with some really bad people. And if Steve was mixed up with the bad people, then Judy might also be mixed up with them, and she should probably stay away from her. And that night, Detective Perez heads over to Nick's place, admitting that you were right, Judy and Steve were the ones behind Jen's husband's death, but I could use some help on this. But he's not willing to do that because he doesn't want to work with the racist police chief in Laguna. It probably doesn't help, too, that he's a little tipsy, but he does go inside and grabs a folder and says, here, I did some digging, this might help, and then closes the door on her. Now, after that visit from Detective Perez and what she told Jen, Jen is a little freaked out. She wants to know exactly who these bad people are that Steve was in business with, and Judy says, it was the Greek mafia. But this actually could work to their benefit because the FBI is only worried about his business, and they'll probably figure that the Greek mafia took Steve out. And Judy's whole contention is that nobody knows where Steve is, so as long as everybody thinks that he is safe and running, then they're safe. But none of this is doing anything to calm Jen's nerves. The group heads in to have dinner that night, but there's a knock at the door, and it's Ben returning a painting that Judy made for his parents. Judy then invites Ben in to have some dessert, and as he's eating it and Judy is getting him tea, Ben says, you know, Judy was probably right. He is down in Mexico. And this is the first time that Jen is hearing about this story. Ben then says, you know, Steve, everywhere he goes, chaos follows. But then they hear a scream from their garage because Henry went looking for the dad bird that hasn't shown up in a few days, and he's found him and he's in trouble. The bird is flying around the garage and he wants to help him out, so Judy grabs the bird and takes him outside, but the bird doesn't fly away, it actually stays. And that night after everyone's left, Jen hears a little tapping going on in the garage, and she goes to investigate and sees the bird is tapping on the window from outside. And the reason the bird's tapping on the window from outside is because dad bird is actually bird mom, and she has a nest full of baby birds in the garage. So Jen takes the nest outside so the mom can be reunited with her kids, but then she sees the pool and gets a flashback of what happened the previous night. And more specifically, what they actually did with the body, because Steve's body is sitting in the freezer in the garage. Thanks so much for checking out this recap. If you don't see the next video there, don't worry, it'll be up in a day or two or as quickly as I can get to it. Please consider subscribing to this channel. It would really help me out. And then like the video if you liked it and hit thumbs down if you don't.